Working with lights in Blender gives us the option to change the color of light. Now, besides the functional property of actually changing the color to us as humans is emotion. And that's why we use it in, for example, cinematography to convey a certain mood or story for a movie or film. And so we can use that same principle of using color and light to tell that same story or whatever story you want to tell. So let's hop on over to Blender and let's dive a little bit into colored lights. All right, very basic scene, and obviously we have the light in here. And the first thing that we're just gonna go over real quick is the color actual setting, right? Because over here, if we hover over this, we get the color data. So it's a hex code FFFFFFF, RGB 11111, etc. But we can click here and we can change this to be any color, very similar to how you would change the color on a material. So for example, we can make this a nice warm orange color. We can make it a cool bluish color. We can make it a very alien green color, and we can make it a very sweet, almost pinkish color. And I'm already spoiling it a little bit here because that's what color is doing, right? This warm tone will make it look warm, this cool tone will make it look cool, and this pinkish tone will make it look sweet. And that's because our minds associate color with certain emotions, feelings, and even memories can be contributed to colors and smells and stuff like that. So using color to your benefit is something really, really important. And before we go a little bit more into the theoretical part of color, let's talk about how lights mix together in Blender. So here we have 3 spotlights which are overlapping in the center here. One is completely green, as you can see here. So it's RGB 0 in the blue, 0 in the red. Same one for the blue one here. It's all blue, no red, no green. Or for this one, it's all red, no green, no blue. And if we overlap these lights here, the middle of this is somewhat of a whitish color. And that's because lighting in Blender is additive, meaning it follows the sort of color mixing scheme that you see if you look up RGB color mixing. That's a good thing to understand. And this also means that if we put a cube in here and we sort of align it there, it's going to get those lights as well, right? But this also makes a difference once we add color to an object. So if we add, I don't know, a bluish color here, let's say we're going to go blue, no red, no green. This can actually change the overall look of our blue color because other colors are sort of adding to this color, especially if we take our world color here and instead of that being this color, will make it all the way red. Now let's turn off these lights here. And as you can see, the blue is now completely gone because the red is sort of canceling out that blue. And if we were to change this to be green, for example, again, hard to find any blue because basically the colors are being mixed in an additive way, and that's how lighting works inside of Blender, or at least colored lighting works inside of Blender. Now let's move on to the more important and more fun part of colored lighting, and that is the color theory behind lighting. So a very common lighting setup, let's just create a new scene here, is something called warm and cool tones, right? So what you'll see in a lot of artworks is that there's 2 lights in a scene. And the first light is following the warm tones, for example. So this one is going to be a nice warmish color. Now, you don't want to overdo this. So you just want to use like a nice warm color, which makes sense, right? Because if you're using this, it's almost impossible for natural light to be this vibrant orange. So you're probably going to get something more along these lines. A good method of doing this, by the way, is to enable use nodes, open up the shading tab here and look up something called a black body node. And if we take the temperature here of the black body and we put that into the color, we can use the temperature, which are actual natural light colors, to generate a color for our lamp. Now, these are Kelvin temperatures, and I'll put up on the screen the overall Kelvin temperatures, which are common. But for example, a 4200 Kelvin light is a warmer light, whereas a 5700 light is a more cooler light, right? So 4200 is a nice warm lighting on this side here. Let's tone it down a little bit, something like a 250. Let's go for something like that. Now on the other side, we're going to introduce some cool tones. So I'm going to move this guy a little bit to the back here. I'm going to point it something like this. And instead of this being, 4200, let's go for a higher number, something like 6500. And immediately you can see we're getting some cooler tones here, right? This is starting to be a little bit more blue. Now it's still messing with the color because we're using this color here. So I'm just going to hover over it and press backspace to reset that. Same here, by the way. And let's just tone down the warm one to make it warmer. 2800, something like that. And there you go. All right, so now you have opposing colors, creating a nice contrast that is very, very common in movies. A great example of using warm and cool tones is, for example, the movie Blade Runner 2049. They do it a lot in there, and it's such a cool way of showing moods, right? Because the warmer tones immediately feel more inviting. They invoke a warmer and more happy sensation, where the cooler tones feel more distant and more dark or even moody or sad, invoking emotions of sadness or depression or other more sinister and less happy emotions. So using color in this way is very, very important. Now, these warm and cool tones are also part of something else, which is what we call complementary colors. If you look up complementary colors, you can find for each individual color which other color is the complementary color. And for example, orange in this case, right? So if you have nice orange here, let's just remove the black body node here. There we go. And blue, and especially a more vibrant blue. These are complementary colors. Same can be said for example, red and green, which creates a very alien kind of look. You'll usually see these types of colored lights on spaceships, alien style movies, horror movies, things which need to invoke an emotion of uneasiness and where you feel like things aren't as they should be. That's the kind of scenarios which you usually use green or red lights, for example. Red is also the color of warning. So if we disable the green light here, using a red lamp like this, for example, you can very easily create a setup which looks like, okay, maybe there's a fire hazard and we're now running on emergency lighting, for example. It's these types of things that we have learned from being alive in the real world that we can use inside of Blender to tell stories. Now, besides complementary colors, another very famous way to use color, and in this case light, because effectively light is color, is a monochromatic color scheme. And this is basically using a bunch of tones which are sort of in the same range, right? So maybe this needs to be a very darkish yellow, and maybe over here we can use a more brighter yellow, something like that. And although the setup that we're using in this example here is extremely basic, you can immediately see that using these kinds of light tones in your scene creates a certain mood. So in this case, it's all very, very warm. And if we use the same monochromatic scheme using cooler tones, we get something completely different. So if we go, I don't know, very bright blue here, and over here we go even darker blue, something like that. And let's make this thing a little bit brighter even. And then this guy is going to be more light Arctic blue, something like that. And voila, immediately you get a very, very cool scene, a very cold setting. You know, if we're in the Arctic, for example, you would expect to see these types of colors. Using light to your benefit is such a crucial skill. So I would definitely advise you to dive into color theory, which is a whole nother topic on its own. It's well worth a study. But yeah, overall, color theory and light, they go hand in hand, and they are so important to conveying the mood. If you want to tell a story with your art, you need lighting and you need color to do that. All right, and that's all for using color and light in Blender. And so let's dive into one of the more common lighting methods, 3-point lighting.